Sarah Martinez walked through the gates of Naval Base Coronado with the same quiet confidence she carried everywhere. At 5 feet 6 inches tall with an athletic build, she didn't look like someone who could take down a grown man in seconds. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a plain blue t-shirt. Nothing about her appearance screamed military, let alone Navy SEAL. She was here for a special assignment that had nothing to do with combat operations. The Navy had asked her to speak at a recruitment event for young people interested in military careers. Sarah wasn't thrilled about public speaking, but she understood the importance of inspiring the next generation, especially young women who might not see themselves in special operations. The recruitment center was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Teenagers and young adults wandered around displays showing different military career paths. There were booths for aviation, engineering, medical corps, and various other specialties. The atmosphere was energetic, filled with the excited chatter of young people exploring their futures. Sarah made her way to the coordinator's desk, where a cheerful Navy petty officer named Jenkins greeted her. "Miss Martinez? We're so glad you could make it today. The kids are really excited to meet someone with your background." "Just happy to help," Sarah replied, scanning the crowd. She noticed 3 young men near the back of the room who stood out from the rest. They were louder than the others, making jokes and generally acting like they owned the place. One of them, a tall blonde kid who looked about 19, was particularly boisterous. "That's Brad, Tyler, and Mike," Jenkins said, following her gaze. "They're all planning to enlist in different branches. Good kids, but they can be a bit energetic sometimes." Sarah nodded. She'd dealt with plenty of cocky recruits over the years. Confidence was good in the military, but arrogance could be dangerous. The coordinator led her to a small staging area where she would give her presentation. "You'll speak in about 20 minutes. We've got about 60 kids here today, all between 18 and 22. Most of them are seriously considering military service." As Sarah reviewed her notes, she couldn't help but overhear the 3 young men from earlier. They had moved closer to the staging area and were talking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm telling you guys, Special Forces training is probably not even that hard," Brad was saying. "It's all mental games and stuff. If you're tough enough and smart enough, you can handle anything they throw at you." Tyler, a stocky redhead with arms covered in tattoos, laughed. "Dude, you don't even know. My cousin went through Ranger training, and he said it was intense. But yeah, if you've got the right mindset, you can push through anything." The third kid, Mike, was quieter than the other 2 but nodded along. "I've been training for months. Running, lifting, combat sports. I'm probably in better shape than half the people they've got training recruits." Sarah raised an eyebrow. These kids had no idea what they were talking about, but she'd heard similar conversations countless times. Everyone thought they knew what military training was like until they actually experienced it. "The thing is," Brad continued, getting more animated, "a lot of these so-called elite soldiers probably just got lucky. Right place, right time, you know? I bet if I had the same opportunities, I could do just as well." A few other young people had gathered around to listen, some looking impressed, others seeming skeptical. Sarah noticed a young woman about 19 years old, who was rolling her eyes at Brad's comments. "Plus," Tyler added, "let's be honest. Some of these special programs are probably just for show now. They've got to make everything look inclusive and diverse, so they're probably letting people through who wouldn't have made it before." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard these kinds of comments before, usually from people who had never served a day in their lives. Jenkins appeared at her side again. "Ready for your introduction? The crowd's getting excited." "Absolutely," Sarah replied, standing up and smoothing her shirt. Jenkins walked to the front of the room and called for everyone's attention. "All right, everyone, gather around. We have a very special guest with us today. Sarah Martinez is here to talk about her experience in the Navy and answer any questions you might have about military service." The crowd began moving toward the front, but Brad's voice carried over the shuffling feet. "Wait, so this lady's supposed to be some kind of military expert? What did she do? Work in administration or something?" Tyler snickered. Probably a desk job. No offense to desk jobs, but we're here to learn about real military action, you know? Sarah heard every word, but she simply walked to the front of the room with the same calm demeanor she'd maintained throughout her military career. She'd faced down armed terrorists, survived grueling training that broke grown men, and completed missions that would give most people nightmares. Three cocky teenagers weren't going to rattle her. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice clear and confident but not aggressive. "Thanks for being here today. I know you're all exploring different paths, and military service can be an incredible opportunity for the right people." She looked around the room, making eye contact with various individuals, including the three young men who had been talking. "Before we get started, I'd love to hear what brought you all here today. What interests you about military service?" Several hands went up, and Sarah spent the next few minutes listening to genuine questions about deployment, training, education benefits, and career opportunities. Most of the young people seemed sincere and thoughtful about their potential futures. Then Brad raised his hand. "Yeah, I've got a question. With all due respect, what exactly is your background? I mean, we want to learn from someone who's actually been in the thick of things, you know? Real military action. Not just," he gestured vaguely. "Whatever." A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Sarah noticed Jenkins looking embarrassed and starting to step forward, probably to intervene. "That's a fair question," Sarah said calmly, waving Jenkins back. "My background is primarily in special operations. I've served multiple deployments overseas, completed advanced training in various specialties, and worked with different military units on high-priority missions." Tyler let out a barely audible snort. "Special operations? Come on." Sarah heard him but continued as if nothing had happened. "The military offers incredible opportunities for people who are willing to work hard and push themselves beyond what they think is possible. But it's also not for everyone, and there's no shame in that." "Right," Brad said, his tone becoming more challenging. "But like, what kind of special operations? I mean, there are different levels of that stuff. Some people call working on a communications team special operations." The room was getting tense now. Several of the young people looked embarrassed by Brad's behavior, and Jenkins was clearly trying to figure out how to handle the situation diplomatically. Sarah maintained her composure completely. "I understand you want specifics. Military service involves many different roles, all of which are important to mission success. But that's not really an answer, is it?" Tyler chimed in, emboldened by his friend. "We're trying to figure out if we should listen to someone who's actually done the hardcore stuff, or someone who's just trying to sound important." Mike, who had been quieter, finally spoke up. "Yeah, no offense, but we're looking for real information from real operators. If you're just going to give us recruiting brochure stuff." The young woman who had been rolling her eyes earlier finally spoke up. "Guys, you're being really rude. She's here to help us, and you're acting like jerks." "We're not being rude," Brad protested. "We're asking legitimate questions. If someone's going to give us advice about military service, don't we have a right to know if they actually know what they're talking about?" Sarah watched the exchange with interest. She'd encountered plenty of people who questioned her credentials over the years, though usually not quite so brazenly. Most of the time, she simply ignored the comments or redirected the conversation. But something about these three was different. They weren't just skeptical. They were deliberately trying to undermine her credibility in front of a room full of impressionable young people. "You know what?" Brad continued, warming up to his theme. "I bet if we really got into it, some of us here could probably outperform whatever training you went through. I've been preparing for Special Forces selection for 2 years. Combat training, endurance work, mental conditioning. I'm probably in better shape than 90% of the people in the military." A few people in the crowd laughed nervously. Jenkins looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. Sarah remained perfectly calm. "Physical fitness is definitely important in military service. Mental toughness is equally crucial." "Right, exactly," Tyler said. "And that's what I'm talking about. Mental toughness. Some people have it, some people don't, and honestly, no offense, but You just don't look like someone who's been through the really intense stuff." The comment hung in the air. Sarah could see the other young people in the room looking back and forth between her and the three young men, trying to figure out what was happening and how it would resolve. Jenkins finally stepped forward. "Okay, guys, I think we should probably move on to some other questions." "No, it's fine," Sarah said quietly, raising a hand to stop him. She looked directly at Brad, Tyler, and Mike. "You three seem pretty confident in your abilities. That's good. Confidence is important in military service." "Yeah, we are confident," Brad said, puffing up slightly. "Because we've actually put in the work to prepare ourselves for real military service. Not just talk about it." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I can see that. And you're right that talk is cheap. Actions matter much more than words." She paused for a moment, looking around the room at all the young faces watching this unexpected drama unfold. Then she looked back at the three young men. "So here's what I'm thinking. Instead of me just telling you about my background, why don't you three show everyone what real preparation looks like? Demonstrate some of the combat training you've been working on." The three young men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this turn in the conversation. "I mean, sure," Brad said, though he sounded slightly less certain than before. "What did you have in mind?" Sarah's expression remained perfectly friendly and calm. "Oh, something simple. Basic hand-to-hand combat scenarios. You've been training for Special Forces selection, so you must have some background in that area." Tyler looked more confident than his friends. "Yeah, actually, we do. I've been doing mixed martial arts for 3 years." "Perfect," Sarah said. "Why don't you pick one simple scenario to demonstrate? Show everyone here what kind of skills they might develop in military training." "Actor." The room was completely silent now. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen, though most of them weren't sure exactly what. Brad looked around at his friends, then back at Sarah. "Okay. Yeah, we can do that. But what about you? Are you going to show us some of your techniques too?" Sarah smiled for the first time since the conversation had started. It wasn't a particularly warm smile. "Oh, absolutely. I'd be happy to demonstrate a few things I learned during my time in service." The three young men had no idea what they had just gotten themselves into. The recruitment center had been transformed into an impromptu demonstration area. Jenkins had quickly moved some tables and chairs to create an open space, though he still looked deeply uncomfortable about the whole situation. The 60 young people formed a loose circle around the cleared area, their earlier casual conversations replaced by an electric tension. Brad, Tyler, and Mike huddled together for a moment, speaking in low voices. Sarah could see them trying to decide who should go first and what exactly they wanted to demonstrate. Their earlier bravado was still there, but she noticed a slight hesitation that hadn't been present when they were just talking. "All right," Brad finally announced, stepping forward. "We'll keep this simple. Basic takedown scenario. One person tries to grab you. You neutralize the threat." He looked at Sarah with what he probably thought was a challenging expression. "Sound reasonable?" Sounds perfect," Sarah replied, her voice still calm and pleasant. She was standing relaxed, hands at her sides, looking like someone waiting for a bus rather than someone about to engage in combat training. Tyler stepped up next to Brad. "I'll demonstrate first. Mike, you want to play the attacker?" Mike nodded and moved into position. Tyler took what he clearly thought was a combat stance. Feet spread, hands raised, looking intense and focused. He'd obviously spent time in martial arts classes and wanted everyone to know it. "Okay," Tyler announced to the crowd. "This is a basic response to a frontal assault. The key is staying calm and using your opponent's momentum against them." Mike lunged forward, reaching for Tyler's shoulders in a fairly telegraphed attack. Tyler responded with a competent but textbook move. He sidestepped, grabbed Mike's arm, and used a hip throw to take him down to the ground. It was executed reasonably well, though nothing that would impress anyone with real combat training. The crowd politely applauded. A few of the younger teenagers looked impressed, but Sarah noticed that some of the older attendees seemed less convinced. Nice work, Sarah said genuinely. Good use of leverage. That's the kind of technique that can be very effective with proper training. Tyler beamed, clearly pleased with the positive feedback. Thanks. Like I said, it's all about preparation and mindset. Brad stepped forward next. My turn. Same scenario, but I'll show a different response technique. This time Tyler played the attacker, and Brad demonstrated what he called an aggressive counterattack. His technique was sloppier than Tyler's, more focused on trying to look impressive than on actual effectiveness, but he managed to get Tyler to the ground through sheer determination and strength. See? Sometimes you need to take the fight to the aggressor, Brad explained to the watching crowd. Don't just defend, attack back. More polite applause followed. Mike went last, demonstrating a simple wrist grab escape that he'd obviously learned from YouTube videos. It worked, but barely. And only because Tyler was cooperating by not applying any real pressure. When they finished, all three young men looked pleased with themselves. They'd shown off their training, proven their point about being prepared for military service, and done it all in front of an audience. That was great, guys, Jenkins said, clearly hoping this would be the end of the demonstration. Really shows the value of preparation and training. But Brad wasn't done. So, he said, turning to Sarah with renewed confidence. Your turn. Show us what you learned in your special operations training. The way he said special operations made it clear he still didn't believe her credentials were legitimate. The three young men stood together, arms crossed, waiting to see what this small woman could possibly do that would impress them. Sarah looked around the room at all the expectant faces. Most of the young people seemed genuinely curious about what she might demonstrate. A few looked concerned that things were getting too heated. Jenkins looked like he was ready to call security. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, I appreciate you three volunteering to help with demonstrations. It takes courage to put yourself out there in front of a group. The three young men exchanged glances, not sure if this was genuine praise or if she was setting them up for something. How about this? Sarah continued. Instead of a pre-planned demonstration, let's do something more realistic. Real combat situations don't usually involve people taking turns and playing predetermined roles. What do you mean? Mike asked, speaking up for the first time in several minutes. Sarah's expression remained friendly, but there was something different in her eyes now. Something that made Jenkins take an unconscious step backward. I mean, if you three are really as prepared as you say you are, why don't you try to subdue me? All three of you, working together. No rules, no predetermined movements. Just use whatever techniques you think would work in a real situation. The room went completely silent. Even the background noise from other parts of the building seemed to fade away. All three of us? Tyler asked, sounding uncertain. Against you? Are you sure about that? Brad added, though his voice had lost some of its earlier arrogance. Sarah nodded. Absolutely. You've been training for Special Forces selection, right? In real military situations, you might face multiple opponents, or have to work as a team to neutralize a single high-value target. This would be good practice. She paused, looking at each of them in turn. Unless you don't think you're ready for that level of challenge, it was perfectly done. She'd issued the challenge in a way that made it almost impossible for them to back down without losing face in front of the entire crowd. Brad looked at Tyler and Mike. They were trapped, and they all knew it. If they refused, they'd look weak in front of everyone. If they accepted, they'd be fighting a woman who claimed to be a special operations veteran, which felt wrong on multiple levels. I don't know, Mike said quietly. Maybe we should just... Come on, Brad interrupted, his pride overriding his common sense. She asked for it. And it's not like we're going to hurt her. We'll take it easy. Tyler nodded reluctantly. Yeah, okay. But we're not going to go all out or anything. Just enough to show the techniques. Sarah smiled that same cold smile from earlier. Oh. Don't worry about holding back on my account. Use whatever force you think is necessary. Jenkins stepped forward one more time. Maybe we should. It's fine, Sarah said firmly, never taking her eyes off the three young men. Everyone here is about to learn something very important about military training. The three recruits spread out around her, trying to look confident but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Brad positioned himself directly in front of her, while Tyler and Mike flanked her on either side. "Whenever you're ready," Sarah said, settling into a stance that looked deceptively casual. For a moment, nobody moved. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. 60 young people held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Then Brad made his move. He stepped forward quickly, reaching out to grab Sarah's shoulders, probably planning to use his size and strength advantage to control her while his friends helped. It was a reasonable strategy against most opponents. Sarah Martinez was not most opponents. What happened next took exactly 43 seconds, though to the watching crowd it seemed both infinitely longer and impossibly fast. As Brad reached for her, Sarah moved with a fluid precision that seemed to defy physics. Her left hand caught his wrist while her right hand struck his elbow joint, hyperextending his arm and sending a shock of pain up to his shoulder. Before Brad could even register what was happening, Sarah had pivoted behind him, using his own momentum to drive him face first toward the ground. But she wasn't done with him yet. As Brad started to fall, Sarah maintained her grip on his wrist, twisting his arm behind his back in an angle that made him cry out in surprise and pain. She guided his descent so that he landed hard on his knees, his arm locked behind him in a position that made any movement agonizing. Tyler, seeing his friend in trouble, rushed in from the left. He threw a wild punch that might have been effective against an untrained opponent. Against Sarah, it might as well have been in slow motion. She ducked under his swing effortlessly, her free hand shooting out to catch Tyler's extended arm. Using a technique that combined elements of judo and military close-quarters combat, she stepped into his body, hooked her leg behind his, and sent him tumbling backward. But as he fell, Sarah's grip on his arm meant he didn't just hit the ground. He hit it hard, with his shoulder taking the full impact. Tyler hit the floor with a sound that made several people in the crowd wince. He tried to get up immediately, but Sarah had followed him down. One knee pressed against his chest, and his arm bent at an angle that suggested any resistance would result in serious injury. Mike, the only one still standing, hesitated for a crucial moment. He could see that his friends were in serious trouble, but he was starting to understand that he was facing someone far beyond his capabilities. That hesitation cost him any chance he might have had. Sarah released Tyler's arm and straightened up in one smooth motion. As she did, she kicked backward with her right foot, catching Mike in the solar plexus just as he finally decided to charge forward. The kick was perfectly placed and timed. Mike doubled over, gasping for air, and Sarah simply stepped to the side and helped his momentum carry him to the ground with a gentle push to the back of his head. 43 seconds after it had started, all three young men were on the ground. Brad was still on his knees with his arm twisted behind his back, afraid to move because of the pain. Tyler was flat on his back, clutching his shoulder and staring at the ceiling with wide eyes. Mike was curled up in a fetal position, struggling to breathe. Sarah stood in the center of the cleared area, not even breathing hard. Her hair was still in its ponytail, her clothes weren't wrinkled, and she looked like she had just finished a casual conversation rather than a 3-on-1 fight. The room was absolutely silent except for the sound of the three young men trying to recover from what had just happened to them. Sarah looked down at them with an expression that somehow managed to be both sympathetic and completely unsympathetic at the same time. "The thing about special operations training," she said conversationally, "is that it's not really about learning a few techniques from YouTube videos or taking some martial arts classes." She walked over to where Brad was still kneeling and gently released his arm. He immediately pulled it against his chest, rubbing his shoulder and looking up at her with something approaching awe. "It's about learning how to function effectively in situations where your life and the lives of your teammates depend on your training, where there are no second chances and no opportunities to tap out." Tyler had managed to sit up, though he was still holding his shoulder. Mike was slowly getting his breath back, but he remained on the ground. Sarah's voice remained calm and educational, as if she were giving a lecture rather than explaining why she had just dismantled 3 confident young men in less than a minute. "The military spends months, sometimes years, preparing people for situations where they might face opponents who are stronger, faster, more numerous, or better armed. The training isn't just about physical techniques, it's about mental conditioning, tactical thinking, and the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. She looked around the room at all the shocked faces watching her. "My name is Senior Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, and I'm a Navy SEAL. I've completed 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, graduated from the Navy's most advanced close-quarters combat programs, and served as an instructor at several special warfare training facilities." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Jenkins looked like he was seeing Sarah for the first time, and several of the young people in the crowd had their mouths hanging open. "I've worked with Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, Delta Force operators, and CIA paramilitary officers. I've been in firefights, completed high-risk extractions, and participated in operations that will never be discussed in public." Brad, Tyler, and Mike were all staring at her now. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. "And do you know what I learned from all of that training and experience?" Sarah continued, looking directly at the 3 young men. "I learned that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who think they know more than they actually do." She knelt down next to Mike, who was finally starting to breathe normally again. "Real military training teaches you humility, because it shows you exactly how much you don't know and how much further you have to go. It teaches you to respect your teammates, your instructors, and your opponents." Standing up again, Sarah addressed the entire room. "Most importantly, it teaches you that talking about how tough you are is very different from actually being tough. And being tough isn't about being able to beat someone up. It's about being able to complete your mission, regardless of how scared, tired, hungry, or overwhelmed you might be." The 3 young men were slowly getting to their feet, looking embarrassed and subdued. None of them seemed to have any serious injuries, but their pride had taken a serious beating. "So," Sarah said, her tone becoming lighter and more friendly, "does anyone have any questions about what military training actually involves?" The silence that followed Sarah's question stretched for what felt like an eternity. 60 young people stared at her with a mixture of awe, respect, and disbelief. Jenkins stood off to the side, his mouth still hanging slightly open, clearly processing the fact that he'd just watched a Navy SEAL demonstrate why Navy SEALs have the reputation they do. Brad was the first to break the silence. He was standing now, though still rubbing his shoulder where Sarah had manipulated his arm. His face was red with embarrassment. But when he spoke, his voice was quieter and more respectful than it had been all day. I had no idea," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "When I saw you walk in, I just assumed. I thought." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You thought I looked too small, too normal, too female to be a real operator," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "It's okay. You're not the first person to make that assumption, and you won't be the last." Tyler had managed to get to his feet as well, though he was moving more carefully than usual. His martial arts training had taught him to recognize skill when he saw it. And what he'd just experienced was so far beyond his level that it was almost incomprehensible. "How long does it take," he asked quietly, "to get that good? Sarah considered the question seriously. "That depends on how you define that good. The basic Navy SEAL training program is 24 weeks long. But that's just the beginning. I've been training continuously for 8 years, and I still learn something new in every exercise, every mission, every interaction with other professionals." Mike had been the last to get up, and he looked the most shaken by the experience. He'd always prided himself on his physical fitness and his mental toughness, but the ease with which Sarah had neutralized all 3 of them had fundamentally challenged his understanding of what strength really meant. He started, then stopped and tried again. Do you think we have what it takes? For military service, after what just happened?" It was a vulnerable question, and Sarah could see that he was genuinely concerned that his performance had disqualified him from his dreams of military service. "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. "What happened here wasn't a test of whether you're qualified for military service. It was a demonstration of the difference between civilian training and military training, between confidence and experience. She looked at each of the three young men in turn. You showed courage by accepting the challenge. You worked as a team. You got back up after being knocked down. Those are all qualities the military looks for. A young woman near the front of the crowd raised her hand tentatively. Ma'am? Can I ask you something? Of course. When you first walked in here, did you know those guys were going to challenge you like that? Sarah smiled. And this time it was warm and genuine. Not specifically. But I've been in enough situations like this to recognize the signs. Young people who are excited about military service sometimes confuse preparation with experience, confidence with competence. She gestured toward Brad, Tyler, and Mike. These three have been working hard to prepare themselves for military service. That's commendable. But they made the mistake of thinking that their preparation made them equivalent to someone with actual military experience. Another hand went up, this one belonging to a young man who looked about 20. How often does this kind of thing happen? People challenging you, I mean, more often than you might expect, Sarah admitted. It's not always as direct as what happened here today. Sometimes it's subtle. People questioning my qualifications, assuming I got my position through diversity programs rather than merit, treating me like I'm playing dress-up in a man's job. Jenkins finally found his voice. Senior Chief, I want to apologize. If I had known. I should have introduced you properly. Explained your background. Sarah waved him off. Don't worry about it. Actually, this worked out better than a formal presentation would have. Everyone here learned something important today. She turned back to the crowd, which brings me to the real lesson I want you all to take from this. It's not about fighting or combat techniques, or who's tougher than whom. It's about respect. Brad looked up at that word, his attention focusing intently on what Sarah was saying. In the military, you learn very quickly that you can't judge someone's capabilities based on their appearance, their background, or your assumptions about who they are. The person next to you might look completely unremarkable, but they could be the one who saves your life when things go wrong. She walked over to where a young woman with short black hair was standing. What's your name? Jessica, the young woman replied. Jessica, what are you thinking about for military service? I'm interested in aviation. Maybe becoming a pilot, Sarah nodded. Female pilots have been flying combat missions for decades now. They've proven themselves in every theater of operation, under every conceivable condition. But I guarantee you that some of them faced people who questioned whether they belonged in a cockpit. She looked around the room again. The military has evolved because it's learned that diversity of backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences makes units stronger, not weaker. But that evolution has required people to challenge their assumptions about what a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine looks like. Tyler raised his hand. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Was it hard? Being a woman in the SEALs, Did you face a lot of what happened here today? Sarah paused, considering how to answer honestly without discouraging anyone from pursuing their goals. It was challenging, she said finally. Not everyone was ready to accept that a woman could meet the same standards as men. Some people assumed I'd been given special treatment, or lower standards. Others treated me like I was there for publicity rather than because I'd earned it. She looked directly at Tyler. But you know what I learned? The people who mattered. My teammates. My instructors. My commanding officers. They cared about whether I could do the job, not what I looked like while doing it. Mike stepped forward. What can we do? How do we avoid this? He gestured vaguely at himself and his friends. Learn to listen before you speak, Sarah replied. Ask questions instead of making statements. Understand that everyone you meet has experiences and knowledge that you don't have. She smiled. And maybe don't challenge people to fights unless you're prepared for the consequences. That got a laugh from the crowd, including from Brad, Tyler, and Mike themselves. An older teenager near the back raised his hand. What's the best way to prepare for military service? Real preparation, Great question, Sarah said. Physical fitness is important, but it's not the most important thing. Mental resilience, the ability to work as part of a team, adaptability, and a willingness to learn, are all more crucial than being able to run a 6-minute mile. She thought for a moment. The military will teach you everything you need to know technically. What they can't teach you is character, integrity, and the ability to put the mission and your teammates ahead of yourself. A young woman who looked like she might be in college raised her hand. Do you have any advice for women who are interested in combat roles? Don't let anyone convince you that you don't belong there, Sarah said immediately. Meet the standards, exceed them if you can, and prove yourself through your actions rather than your words. And understand that you might face challenges that your male colleagues don't face, but those challenges will make you stronger. She paused. Also, find mentors. There are women in every branch of the military who have walked the path you're considering. Learn from their experiences. Jenkins checked his watch and stepped forward. I hate to interrupt, but we're running close to our scheduled end time. Does anyone have any final questions for Senior Chief Martinez? Brad raised his hand one more time. When Sarah nodded at him, he took a deep breath. I want to apologize, he said, his voice carrying to the entire room. Not just for challenging you, but for the way I acted before that. The things I said about diversity and people getting opportunities they didn't earn. That was wrong. And I'm sorry. Tyler nodded vigorously. Yeah, me too. We were being arrogant and disrespectful, and we had no idea what we were talking about. Mike joined in. We came here thinking we knew everything, and we ended up learning that we knew nothing. Thank you for teaching us that lesson, in a way we'll never forget. Sarah looked at the three young men with approval. Apology accepted. And the fact that you can acknowledge your mistakes and learn from them tells me you all have the potential to be excellent military personnel. She addressed the entire room one last time. I want to leave you with this thought. Military service is about being part of something bigger than yourself. It's about serving your country, protecting people who can't protect themselves, and working with a team to accomplish missions that matter. She paused. It's also about understanding that the person standing next to you, regardless of what they look like or where they came from, is there for the same reasons you are. They've met the same standards, taken the same oath, and committed to the same mission. Sarah smiled. Respect that person. Learn from them, and be prepared to have your assumptions challenged, because if today taught you anything, it should be that you never know who you're really talking to. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah was surrounded by young people asking questions, seeking advice, and thanking her for her time. The energy in the room had completely transformed from the earlier tension into something positive and inspiring. Brad, Tyler, and Mike lingered near the edge of the group, clearly wanting to speak with her again, but not sure if they should interrupt. Sarah noticed them waiting and walked over. You three don't need to look so serious, she said with a grin. You're not in trouble. We just wanted to say thank you, Brad said. I've been preparing for military service for 2 years, but I learned more about what it actually means in the last hour than in all that time combined. Tyler nodded. And we wanted to ask, do you think we should still pursue military service? After what happened? Sarah looked at each of them carefully. Do you want to pursue military service? Yes, all three answered simultaneously. Then pursue it. Just remember what you learned today. The military will test you in ways you can't imagine, but it will also teach you things about yourself that you never knew. If you go in with humility and a willingness to learn, you'll do fine. She handed each of them her card. If you have questions during the application process, feel free to reach out. And if you do end up in the military, remember this conversation when you meet someone who doesn't look like your idea of a warrior. As the three young men walked away, Jenkins approached Sarah with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment on his face. Senior Chief, I have to say, that was the most effective recruitment presentation I've ever witnessed. Half the people in here are probably going to sign up tomorrow. Sarah laughed. That wasn't really the goal, but I'm glad it worked out that way. Can I ask you something? Jenkins said. Did you plan that whole thing? You mean did I plan for 3 overconfident young men to challenge me to a fight in front of a room full of impressionable teenagers? Sarah shook her head. No, that was just a happy coincidence. She gathered her things and prepared to leave. But I will say this. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones people learn by experience, rather than by lecture. As Sarah walked toward the exit, she reflected on the afternoon's events. She'd come here to give a simple presentation about military careers, and instead she'd ended up providing a very different kind of education. 3 young men had learned about humility, respect, and the danger of making assumptions. 60 other young people had learned that strength comes in many forms, and that their preconceptions about warriors and heroes might need some adjustment. Most importantly, everyone in that room had learned that military service wasn't about being the toughest person in the room. It was about being part of a team where everyone brought their own unique strengths and capabilities to accomplish something important. As she reached her car, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her commanding officer. How did the recruitment event go? Sarah smiled as she typed her response. Mission accomplished. I think we're going to see some excellent recruits from this group. She didn't mention the fight. She didn't need to. The real victory hadn't been in demonstrating her combat skills. It had been in opening minds, challenging assumptions, and inspiring young people to see military service as something bigger than their individual desires to prove how tough they were. As she drove away from Naval Base Coronado, Sarah thought about the young woman who wanted to be a pilot, the quiet young man who had asked thoughtful questions about preparation, and yes, even about Brad, Tyler, and Mike, who had learned some valuable lessons about respect and humility. They would all be better service members because of what had happened today. And that, more than any demonstration of fighting techniques, was what made the afternoon worthwhile. In 43 seconds, 3 confident young men had learned that they still had a lot to learn. In the hour that followed, everyone in that room had learned something about what military service really meant. Sometimes, the best lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. And sometimes, those teachers are exactly the people you would least expect.